very special missions. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith is on one of her own on behalf of all of us. That mission is to exert Alberta's rights and authority within the Confederation of Canada and strike fear in the hearts of the stupidest man in all of politics. Yes, I'm talking about Justin Trudeau.
These measures are not something that we want to do. They are a plan to counteract the absurd, illogical, unscientific, and unconstitutional interference in Alberta's electrical grid by a federal government that simply doesn't care what happens to our province so long as they have a good virtue signaling story to tell their leftist friends and special interests. We would much rather work with Ottawa on meaningful ways to reduce emissions while continuing to generate reliable, affordable electricity. That's better for all Albertans and Canadians. But we refuse to meekly accept actions which are so plainly destructive to Alberta's economy and to the very safety and security of Alberta citizens. We will do whatever we must to stand up and protect the people of this province.
In doing so, Danielle Smith is also forcing the NDP to oppose NDP ideology in a bit of a strange way. The NDP socialist concept of the government being big and doing everything better than the private sector has been a cornerstone of the party since its inception. But right now, they are crying the blues about the potential for a new crown corporation here in Alberta, and I love watching them twist themselves in knots, but we'll get to that in a second. First, let's talk about what my premier has done, this time to the feds. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith invoked her Sovereignty Act, something that we were told just couldn't be done, and it was a big theatrical threat, conservative showboating, if you will. We were all told by our moral and intellectual superiors in the mainstream media that Danielle Smith would never use her flagship piece of legislation, which mandates her to fight with the feds every time the feds overstep into provincial jurisdiction. We were told the Sovereignty Act was just right-wing virtue signaling and that things wouldn't change and Albertans would be happy, just so happy, to be the doormat under the feds' feet the way we've always been. Because why do anything different in politics ever? However, bright and early Monday morning, Danielle Smith used the Sovereignty Act to make life more affordable for Albertans.
Ottawa persists in trying to regulate and remake Alberta's electrical system from generation to transmission to distribution, which will make life more expensive for families and put the reliability of our grid at risk. And they're pushing ahead with their plan, even though Section 92A of the Constitution of Canada is clear that legislating and regulating the development of electricity falls within the jurisdiction of the provinces. Alberta's government is committed to protecting Albertans from federal overreach. That is why this afternoon I intend to table a resolution in the chamber under the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act. We developed this legislation to shield the province from federal intrusions, and we're using it now because the consequences of this particular overreach would be so severe.
And the feds, of course, they're scared, so scared, and they don't like it, but isn't that truly the point?
So let's talk about the Alberta Sovereignty Act, and we'll go back to questions about official languages after. Like, this is a massive distraction from the real preoccupations of Albertans, which are housing, growing an economy that works for everybody, getting the renewables moratorium reduced, and actually building up an economy that works for everybody. I said this when the act came out. It's a dubious piece of legislation. This is theater to distract people from what's really going on, which is the fact that Danielle Smith has made some bad calls. She scared away at least $12 billion on renewables already. That could go as high as $30 billion. When I met with her a couple of weeks ago, I said, can this end soon? And she didn't have a clear answer on that. She's actually put in a piece of legislation that would stop regulations that don't plan to go in place until 2035. And there's a working table in place to actually talk about if 2035 is even the right date. So this is political theater. It's a political spat. It's another opportunity for the province to try to pick a fight with the feds that, quite frankly, Albertans don't need. And if the premier or her ministers want to reach out to the federal government, they can just pick up the phone. They don't have to impose the Sovereignty Act.
Contrary to many of the claims that, well, all of the claims that the premier is making on this, we have, in fact, signed agreements with provinces like Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, who are still very dependent on fossil fuel to produce their electricity, and who've agreed to work with us to have a carbon neutral grid by 2035. So it is possible to do so in Canada. It is possible to do so in jurisdictions that are still very dependent on fossil fuel, but it means that we have to work together, not against each other. And that's what I find unacceptable with the position that Premier Smith is taking, because it's bad for Albertans, it's bad for workers in Albertans, it's bad for the economy of Alberta. And obviously, we know that as far as Pierre Poilievre is concerned, nothing would happen on this, because he doesn't even, the official position of his party is that they don't believe in climate change, let alone measures that we should put in place to fight climate change. So we will continue moving ahead with this. There is no legal basis for what Alberta is doing. And we feel that we're on very solid ground. And the fact that we already have some provinces who are on board with us, as well as a number of private companies and investors who say that this is the way to the future. We will continue working on this.
But here's the thing. Premier Smith told the feds she was going to do this. She warned them over and over and over again.
How are the talks going between Alberta and the feds with regards to the clean electricity regulations? Because, of course, the clock is ticking on this whole file.
Well, we're getting pretty frustrated because they've had a Supreme Court loss now that says that they cannot use their federal power as a pretext to invade provincial jurisdiction. And they're acting like that Supreme Court case didn't happen. They had another loss on the issue of plastics, which was also an unconstitutional overreach and unreasonable. And instead of accepting the court's judgment, they're going to drag it out again. So we've got a lawless federal government. And when you have a lawless federal government, then you've got to assert that the Constitution matters. We've got the Supreme Court behind us. We're continuing to press that matter. They haven't dropped it yet. But I can tell you we are just like Premier Moe, getting increasingly frustrated at the way they're behaving on this. We think that there is a resolution. So a line to get to 2050 on emissions reductions targets. That's the position that we continue to put forward. And that's what we're going to do in Alberta, quite frankly. We know that that's achievable. We know we have the constitutional jurisdiction. And we know that they're acting in a way that's outside of their boundaries.
I guess Justin Trudeau's just not used to dealing with a woman he can't grope, bully, fire, or otherwise put in her place. Danielle Smith is smarter than Justin Trudeau, and Justin Trudeau knows it.